Hey, hey, it's Valentine's Day. Thought this music would be appropriate. That's right, there's no better time to light some candles, pour some wine, curl up with that person you love, and listen to the Edgar Ortega radio show. Today we're talking about falconry, often called the sport of kings. If you've ever been curious about what's involved in becoming a falconer, today's your lucky day. My guest is Bridget Maguire-Colton. She's from the California Hawking Club, and she's going to tell us what falconers do and what you need to do to become one. You know, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in different types of animals, and I've always enjoyed going out and observing animals out in the wild. Birds have always been more difficult for me to see out in nature. Some of you know I have a degenerative eye disease, so I can't see very well. So birds are always harder for me to spot and identify out in the wild. And now there's no hope of me doing it. So falconry isn't something I'd be proficient doing. But I have a friend who's a falconer, Ricky Ortiz. I watched him go through the process of obtaining his license, his falconry license, and get to where he is now in it. And he's having lots of fun with it. It's been pretty cool watching him. I've gone out with him to watch him fly his birds and go on hunts with him. It really is fascinating. It's a fascinating sport. So I thought I'd share this sport of falconry with you. And if you learn something in the process listening today, well, then I did my job. My guest today is Bridget Maguire-Colton, and she's from the California Hawking Club. Bridget, thank you for being here with me.
Hi, thanks for having me, Edgar.
No, it's great that you agreed to talk here about falconry, and I'd like to teach the public a little bit more about what it is, and maybe if people are interested, how they could get into this sort of thing. First of all, tell me about what is falconry. I mean, what do you do? And then tell me a little bit about the California Hawking Club.
Okay. Falconry is hunting with a trained bird of prey. So we are hunters primarily, but we use wild birds in order to do that. So where other hunters use guns or bows, our weapon of choice is birds. And the California Hawking Club is the largest state organization in the country that I'm aware of. And we work closely with the lawmakers to ensure that falconry is legal and that we get the laws that work best for falconers. And it's an ongoing process. Just recently, in the last couple of years, the federal government said we're no longer going to be overseeing falconry. We're going to leave it to the states. But the states had to come up with their own regulations in a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And the California Hawking Club worked really closely to make sure that we had those regulations in time.
Oh, very good. And so you assist people trying to get licensed and people that are already in it. You organize events, things like that?
Yeah, that's right. We try to connect people with falconers in their area. That's part of what I do as the apprentice chair for Northern California. We have meets throughout the year. Our big one is in January. We just finished that one. And it's a great way for falconers who are traditionally very, lonely, kind of on their own people. It's a good way for them to have a community and to meet other falconers.
Right. Now tell me about some of the animals you work with, or your falconers might work with.
Some of the most popular birds in falconry are the red-tailed hawk and the American kestrel. Apprentices start with those, and so those are very, very popular. They're very ubiquitous. I mean, the red tails will hunt any largish game, rabbits, pheasant, ducks, maybe even. And the kestrels are hunting smaller game, so sparrows and smaller things like that. And
those are all over, like you said.
Oh, yeah. And another bird that's gotten really popular is the Harris hawk. And I happen to have 2 Harris hawks. And the cool thing with them is we can actually get them together in groups and hunt them at the same time, and the birds will learn to work together like a pack of wolves.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've through one of my friends who does this, I've seen some of the process of the trapping and a little bit on the training. So it's really interesting to learn. So I'm learning a lot with you here too at the same time. If somebody were, how do you go about it? I mean, do you buy these birds from breeders or do you catch them from the wild? How does that work?
A little bit of both. As an apprentice, you have to trap a wild bird, and the regulations state exactly what you can trap and when and how and all that. And as you go along, after you pass your apprenticeship, you become a general falconer, and then you are actually allowed to buy a captive bred bird if you'd like. And a lot of falconers do that because there's certain birds they want that either aren't found in the wild because they're hybrids or that they're not common in their area, like the Harris hawk. And I know a lot of people like getting hybrid falcons because, like with breeding dogs, they're trying to get the best of each species in one bird.
Oh, yeah. So there's a different animals you work with, you mentioned. What sort of care is involved with these animals on a daily basis? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so every day I'll probably weigh my birds because the training and the work we do really depends on how much the bird weighs, how their behavior is going to be. So if my bird weighs too much, that means I probably fed him too much the day before and he's not really going to want to do what I want him to do. However, if he weighs too little, then he's also going to have that attitude of, I don't have the energy to work, so he's not going to want to do what I want him to do. However, if he's right in the pocket of that perfect weight of, I'm ready to work, I'm just hungry enough to work, but I've got energy to fly, we'll go out, and if it's a hunting day, we'll go to a field, and I will walk through that field, and as I walk, the prey gets up and runs. So like rabbits, pheasant, they don't want to be around the person. And then the hawk's job then is to fly down the prey, catch it, and then the falconer manages that prey and, takes it to the bag to take it home to either feed the bird later or to feed the family. So that might be a typical hunting day for me. And it might only be a few hours. It might be half a day, depending on how much driving I have to do. But yeah, that's typically what a day for hunting looks like for me.
Oh, that's really interesting. So is all the food that your animal gets, is that directly from the stuff that he or she hunts, or do you have food at home as well?
Yeah, a lot of the food I have on hand for the birds is stuff they've caught previously, but sometimes I have to supplement. So I will raise quail sometimes. I'll use day-old chicks, which is a really good source of vitamins and nutrients in a nice little condensed package. Some people feed mice, they get frozen mice from suppliers. Because, working 9 to 5 jobs, regular jobs, we don't have time, a lot of us, to go hunting every single day to fill the freezers.
Yeah.
So you got to supplement with other things.
That's good. So now you can, I imagine you can overfeed a bird. You got to monitor its weight. And if it's too fat, is it going to fly the same?
Yeah, exactly. You've really got to watch it. And there have been times when I've thought, well, the bird's a little high, but I think I'll still try. And, either the bird ends up sitting in a tree and just staring at me, or sometimes our birds fly off and they decide they don't want to come back.
Either out of shape or doing too well. Yeah. So you work with this animal for a long time, and there's always that risk. The animal says, see ya, and I'm gone. Never comes back to you.
That's right.
And these are animals. Talk a little bit about the capture process. Say you're starting out, you want to capture your first bird. What bird would it be? You mentioned the red-tailed hawk, I assume.
Yeah, it would either be a red-tailed hawk or an American kestrel. And your sponsor is going to be the one to really teach you how to build your trap, because it's a really specialized trap. But it actually involves a live bait. So either a mouse or a rat, sometimes a sparrow if you're trapping kestrels, something that the bird you want is going to find really tasty. But that bait animal never gets harmed. The style of trap we use, which is called a balchatri, is built in such a way that it protects the bait but still ensnares the bird you want to trap. And we're never far away. When we're setting this trap, we are very close by, so that the minute the bird is trapped, we are right there to handle the bird, to make sure they're not going to get hurt, and to check the bird out and see if it's really the bird we want.
Right, and you want it to be a certain age too, right?
Correct. The law says that we have to take birds that are under a year old. With red tails, that's easy to tell because their feathers, they molt and they change colors. I mean, the feathers don't change colors. They grow new feathers that are different colors. And so it's a little easier to tell with the red-tailed hawks. With kestrels, it's harder, much harder to tell adults from juveniles. So the law actually says you can take a kestrel of any age, but typically we don't want to do trapping in the early spring because we don't want to break up a mated pair or take a parent away from a nest that might need to feed chicks.
Right, so there are these regulations, and you're mindful of the birds in the wild and their breeding habits and everything. I imagine this would be something you might get criticized from, say, like animal rights groups and stuff like that. But there's actually all these things in place to you guys actually care about the animals. You're not just out trapping them.
Oh, absolutely. No, we love the birds, and there have been studies done that show that falconry has a zero impact on wild populations. In fact, it may even be that because we take some birds out of the wild that may not be doing well. The theory is that the birds that come to our traps may be a little hungrier, maybe not feeling well, and we get them to a vet, we get them healthy, we teach them to hunt, and then a lot of these birds we actually release back to the wild, so they go back to raise healthy babies.
Right. Now, talk to the person that's concerned, say, oh, you're taking that animal out of the wild, how it seems like it would be traumatic for it. But there is a process of training these birds and getting them acclimated to the falconer, and to the point where they trust them completely and they're there pretty willingly.
Absolutely. The trauma is brief. The trauma of I'm stuck on a trap. Oh my gosh, there's a giant hairless monkey coming towards me and I think it might eat me. So that trauma lasts fairly briefly. And then we get them to a quiet, dark place and the training begins. And what we want to do is first teach this bird that this human is not going to eat you. We're actually going to feed you, but we're going to ask a little something first. We're going to ask that you trust us enough to bend your head down, to take that food from us. And once that trust is established, you can do all sorts of things. We can teach them to fly to the glove. We can teach them to fly away from us and then come back. And that trust has to be maintained. The minute you break that trust, that bird is going to leave. And that's the thing is when we take off the leash, when we're ready to free fly the bird, that bird could leave anytime it wants. So the fact that these birds stay with us tells us that they're getting a benefit too. It's not a one-way street.
Right. You guys are outdoorsmen, outdoorswomen, whatever you want to call it. But generally you see a lot of men in this hobby. Talk to me about, if you can, the history of falconry. This isn't something that just got started a few years ago.
Oh no, it's one of the oldest sports in recorded history. We think that it may have started at least 3,000 years ago, probably somewhere in Asia, maybe near Mongolia. We're not entirely sure because there's not a whole lot of documentation, but we have found artwork in those areas from at least 3,000 years ago. And the funny thing is that throughout history, we are still using a lot of the same techniques, some of the same equipment that they were using 3,000 years ago. And of course, there have been some modifications, radio telemetry. Now there's GPS so we can track our birds. But, when I'm training a new apprentice, I teach them the traditional way of doing things before I teach them the more modern methods, because there's a reason that it's lasted 3,000 years. It's these tried and true methods.
No, that's really amazing. There's always that image of some handsome guy on a horse riding, and then his falcon just lands on his arm. Very majestic, very beautiful.
Oh yeah.
But not anybody can do this. You can't just go out because you feel like it tomorrow and go trap a bird, right? There's a process of licensing. Talk to me a little bit about somebody. Say you're talking to somebody who's listening to this and saying, oh, this sounds really interesting. What is the licensing process? How do you go about it? You mentioned different ranks of falconry too. What's the process if somebody were interested in getting into falconry? What do they expect?
I get this question a lot, and it's a bit of a process. It's not just, go into an office, pay your money, and you've got your license.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more to it. The best place to go for resources, at least in California, is the California Hawking Club website. And I'll make sure your listeners have that a little later. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to schedule to take your test with the state. And hopefully you've studied beforehand, because there's a lot of information on it. It's 100 questions, and you have to get 80% correct in order to pass. So let's say you've studied, you've taken your test, and you've passed. The next thing you want to do, if you haven't already, is to get your hunter's license. So you want to take your hunter's ed course, which is an 8-hour in-person, or I forget what there is an online portion that you can do, but I believe it's more time involved. And you want to have your hunting license because we are hunters. And if you find you get your falconry license before you get your hunting license, you may have your bird, but not actually be able to fly it, and that might hold you back. So let's say you've got those two things in place. Your next step is going to be trying to find a sponsor. Now, if you're lucky and you know falconers, then hopefully you've got it easy, because one of them will sponsor you and teach you. If not, you contact someone like me, the apprentice chair for the California Hawking Club, and with any luck, I can put you in touch with a few falconers in your area who will either sponsor you or connect you to someone else who can sponsor you. Sponsorship is about relationships. You want to have a good relationship with your sponsor because you're learning from them. And if you don't have a good relationship with them, you're not gonna learn from them as well. And so you're an apprentice for 2 years under this sponsor. And at the end of those 2 years, hopefully your sponsor says, all right, you've learned all I can teach you and you are ready to move on. And then you move up to what is known as general class. And at that class, your world opens up in terms of birds of prey that you can fly. You can buy captive bred birds. You can fly all sorts of different things. The only thing you can't fly is golden eagles. You spend 5 years as a general, hopefully learning more and gaining experience. And then after 5 years, the state will upgrade you to master class, which sounds really fancy. And it sounds like I could call any wild bird out of the air to my glove, but it really just means I have at least 7 years of experience.
Like your first black belt, maybe.
Right.
No, that's really interesting. And then you mentioned the golden eagle. You mentioned a few hawks. Give me a few more species that you might work with. You mentioned the red-tailed hawk, kestrels, golden eagle later on, Harris hawk. What else?
Another popular one is the Peregrine Falcon. Now in California, we're not allowed to trap those birds. We have to get them from captivity, but who knows? The future, that may change in the future. Then you've got the Prairie Falcon, and California allows a limited number of take on those. And then there are people known as ostrichers, and I may be pronouncing that wrong. It's a funny old word, and it means someone who flies the short-winged hawks. And those are your Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, and goshawks. I know a lot of your listeners may have read H is for hawk, and that involves a goshawk, which are a very cool bird, very forest-dwelling bird. They love flying through trees, and they will chase down just about anything from jackrabbits to pheasant to ducks. Goshawks are amazing, but they do take an extra bit of patience than some of the other species.
It's a little bit advanced, right? And there's also, I imagine, some hybrid species people work with.
That's right. Just recently, and then last 20, 30 years or so, falconers started hybridizing species. This came about, when the peregrine was declining and they were trying to figure out how to get their numbers back up. And they realized maybe we can cross the peregrine with another species that we really like. So the Gyrfalcon is the world's largest falcon, and they're found in the Arctic. And people really like them because they're big and they're powerful, but they don't do well in warmer climates. And so what they did is they started crossing them with the peregrine, which does well everywhere. And what they got was this larger falcon that could tolerate the warmer temperatures and the diseases found in this area. And that just exploded. It just expanded to all sorts of species, and people are trying all sorts of crosses, and sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. I just saw a photo recently. Someone had crossed a red-tailed hawk with a golden eagle, and it looked really strange.
Yeah, no, I'd imagine. Is there an issue with hybridizing with those getting out into the wild population? Is that an issue?
There is a bit of concern. And so with these hybrids, they are required to have two telemetry on them with separate frequencies. So maybe one on the back and one on the leg, so in case one fails, you've got the other to try to track this bird down if it does fly off. And some of the hybrids are sterile, but not all of them. So there is a concern that a hybrid could get out and breed with a natural population. But we've also got cases, there's a few rare cases of natural hybridizations. I saw a photo of a red-tailed hawk had crossed with a red-shouldered hawk, which is a smaller hawk, and it was successfully trying to breed with another red-shouldered hawk. So that was really interesting, that there is some natural hybridization happening, which is, of course, how new species are, developed over time and how, evolution eventually happens. But we really want to limit how much hybridization we release and we cause.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. That's why I was wondering about them getting out. So there's the tracking and all that to help with that. And you guys are mindful of it, so it's good that you're not just producing these mutants and just letting them go without caring.
Right.
So, like with other hobbies involving animals, you guys are working with a lot of native species.
Right.
What's can people work with exotic species?
Yeah, there are regulations about bringing in exotic species of raptors, but people do it. It takes a while. It takes a lot of money if you're bringing them in from outside of the U.S. Now, there are some breeders in the U.S. breeding these exotic species because they know that there is a draw for them. Not as much as, say, for a Harris hawk, but there's an interest there. And, these exotic species, they're cool, and sometimes they do really well, and sometimes we show them our native prey, and they just aren't quite as effective as our native birds are.
Oh, that's really interesting. People might be attracted to these majestic birds they see from other countries, but of course you have this good to start out with these native species. Talk to me about owls.
Well, everyone thinks owls are really wise, and unfortunately, that's not true. We've been kind of lied to through our fairy tales to think that owls are wise, and I think it comes from those forward-facing eyes. People think they look very intelligent. The thing is, owls are very primitive, and their brain is relegated to their senses, so vision and hearing. There's not a whole lot of room in there for memory. And so people who work with owls have to be very patient. It takes, where it might take me a week to teach my Harris hawk something, it'll take 6 weeks to teach the owl that same behavior. And if you don't keep doing that behavior every day, the owl tends to forget it, and you have to start over. So the owls they used for Harry Potter had to be worked with over and over and over. And if there was ever a break in the training, they basically had to start from the beginning. And they got some great behaviors out of these owls. But anyone looking to hunt with an owl is going to hopefully they're not going to be too hungry, because you might hunt with a great horned owl and they might do okay. But being nighttime hunters, being nocturnal, the laws say you cannot hunt at night. So they're really limited to only dawn and dusk, just before and just after. And that's really the only time you could hunt these birds and be effective at all. That is provided that your bird has taken well to the training and you've taught it to come back to you or to hunt and not just leave.
All right, so somebody wanting to get into falconry because they love owls for whatever reason, probably not going to work with them for quite some time into their falconry study.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, people do falconry, or they use these animals for many different things. They can actually get jobs with falconry. What sort of things could a falconer expect to do and get paid for maybe someday?
Well, falconry in itself, the licensing does not allow us to make money with our birds. You have to get a little bit outside of that. So you can either go into breeding, which is another license, and you can breed hawks and falcons, and that can be a money-making thing, but it's also very expensive to do. Another avenue that's recently come about is abatement, and that as well, there's another license to get if you want to do abatement, but they do allow those who hold abatement licenses to have other falconers working beneath them on their license. And that's actually something I've started doing. And abatement covers a wide range of things, but it's basically using raptors to discourage pest birds in an area. Now, this might be seagulls at a landfill. It might be pigeons at a shopping center. It could be blackbirds and starlings on wine grapes, which is something huge in the Napa area. They're employing lots and lots of falconers in the vineyards to try to preserve their wine harvest because these little blackbirds and starlings will just devastate a crop.
Right, maybe like where you wouldn't want birds flying into jet engines at airports, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where it started, and then it just branched off from there.
Well, it's really interesting. Something people can look forward to. Now, you can't just put this bird in a bird cage you get at the pet store, right? Where do you keep these things?
Right. You have to build kind of specialized housing. And this is something that every apprentice learns is what is approvable housing for your license. And for myself, I like building a muse. And it's basically like if you took a tool shed and made the inside walls very smooth, and instead of windows, you had vertical bars on the windows, so not window panes. And that creates a nice airy environment that is still safe for the bird. And we really want to think about feather damage. So think about a chain link or wire cage. And if your bird is able to fly against those and bash their wings against them, they're going to do a lot of damage to their feathers. And that's not going to be great for hunting. So we really want to think about safety when it comes to these housing situations.
Right, so people want to have a space where they can build these mews and keep the animals. Is there anything like, people that have horses, they don't all have the facilities to keep them, but they'll board them somewhere. Is there anything like that?
Not really. The law does allow you to house your bird at someone else's home, but I don't know too many people doing that. I know a lot of urban falconers have had to get very creative with their housing situations because you really do want your bird housed with you so that you can work with it as much as possible. So you're not traveling to another place to work with your bird and then go home. The birds do better when they're around us more often. It's something we call manning, which is essentially getting them used to being around man or women.
Yeah, in your case. So this isn't a hobby. You could just let the birds, you just feed them and water them and not exercise them on a regular basis. You have to have the right facilities to keep them. And the licensing, you need to be aware of the laws and everything, and to be connected with local groups like this so that you can, do everything right. I'm going to edit this long pause out. I lost my train of thought. Talk to me about what people can do if they're interested now in this, and where do they go? Do they go to your website and to find out more information?
Yeah, so if you're interested in becoming a falconer or even just learning more, figuring out what books to read, you can go to the California Hawking Club website, and that's www.calhawkingclub.org. And there's links to all sorts of different resources. If you're interested in rehabilitation, that's a completely different subject. Because some people are like, I want to work with the birds, but I don't want to hunt with them. So if you're looking for rehabilitation, Google raptor rehabilitation. It should pull up something for you. You can also, if you're not in California, there's NAFA, the North American Falconers Association. And I believe that's nafa.org. Not entirely 100% on that one. But yeah, they've got resources for falconers and falconer hopefuls all over the country.
And is there like a yearly licensing fee? How does that work?
So each state has its own licensing fees, and club membership is separate from that, because club membership is not required, but it is a handy resource. I believe currently the California Hawking Club membership is about $45 a year. Falconry licensing in California is yearly. Some states do every 3 years, which would be great. But every year, I think I pay, let me think, around $150, $180 a year just for my falconry license. That doesn't include my hunting license, which I also have to buy, just like gun hunters and bow hunters.
No, that's all been very interesting. It's fascinating. I enjoyed learning these things. If you're interested in becoming a falconer, you can check out the California Hawking Club website, like she said. Bridget, thanks so much for talking to me about falconry.
You're very welcome.
It's been very awesome. Thank you so much. That was Bridget Maguire-Colton of the California Hawking Club. If you want more information about falconry or the California Hawking Club, go to their website at calhawkingclub.org, and you can find more information on that. We hope you enjoyed this program. I'm always trying to get great animal topics on here, and something new, something interesting. If you have something you want to talk about, get a hold of me. You can contact me through the Edgar Ortega Radio Show Facebook page. And please be sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just look for Edgar Ortega, one word, on YouTube, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I appreciate it. We're getting lots of new subscribers. If you enjoy the show, please share it on your social media and tell people about it. And please continue to keep listening. Thank you, everybody. My name is Edgar Ortega, and this is the Edgar Ortega Radio Show.